Hello, everyone, and welcome to Poetry Hour Notes from the Field, um, January's installment 2023, the first installment for the new year. Um, my name is Marcelo Hernandez Castillo, and I am the YubaSutter Poet Laureate uh, in conjunction with YubaSutter Arts and Culture. Um, Thank you all for streaming in. And before I start talking about updates in poetry, about some of the things that I've been working on, I wanted to make an announcement for a special event coming up at Yuba Sutter Arts. It is uh, a our large fundraiser called Bandits and Bandanas. Um, which all the proceeds are going to go to the long awaited phase two of the revitalization of the Sutter Theater. It's going to be including renovation of the main stage, the original front half of the theater, just like the original project. And we could not do it without community involvement and support to reach our goal for this project. It's going to be uh, January 21st at 5:30. There's going to be a bunch of things that include with your ticket a Giddy Up Saloon at 5:30, Chuck Wagon Supper, and performances by a bunch of local artists and performers: John Cassidy, Virgil Atkinson, Midtown Stomp Swing Dancers, Hellcat Maggie Band, and Saddle Up Songsters. So there'll be also a silent auction, bandana bucks, and fiddling. So it should be a fun event. Please spread the word. And there are additional sponsorship packages that would really help this community organization, this community project, to bring arts into our pocket of Northern California. Um, so thank you for joining again. Our first installment, I guess I am coming back to my roots as me, myself as a poet. And I wanted to share something that I've been working on recently. I might have already alluded to this in a previous stream, but just to let you know that this is a continuing process for me as a writer, as a professor, a university professor who also teaches creative writing. I wanted to share a poem with you that I've been working on recently and talk a little bit about my process, talk about the process of revision, and talk about where poems come from. I guess for every reading that I give, I always have to preface my introductions with reminding people that poetry is not something that was just done 1,500, 100 years ago, that it is a burgeoning field. It is being actively, it is a very active endeavor, and thousands of poets, not just in the US, but across the world, are doing very exciting things. And I have a list of some great poetry collections that were released last year, like our very own US poet laureate Ada Limon, who is from Sonoma, California, who lives now in Kentucky. She is the first Latina woman to be presented that honor. The first poet laureate was Robert Frost in the Kennedy administration, and since then, I think there's been about 20 something poet laureates at the US poet laureates. So her latest book, The Hurting Kind, was released from Milkweed Books. I would highly encourage you to read it. Ada is a wonderful poet and deserves all the accolades and praise. Um, so, because of my lifelong goal to convince people that poetry is happening now, part of the title of this now year-long series is Notes from the Field, so that people get a little preview as to what does a poet do. Not surprising, I like the outdoors. And the difference between my first book and the poems that I'm writing now is that the majority of the poems in my first books in Sontle happened at the desk. That they began at the desk and ended at the desk, meaning they were very interior poems versus poems that come from an exteriority of experiences. And the poems that I'm writing and working on now come from the field, you know, Notes from the Field. I chose this title, Notes from the Field, very purposefully because poetry is about bringing people together and building community. Uh, and my endeavor here with as poet laureate is to announce that, is to try to bring programming here to our county. Um, and back to the fact that I am, I guess, mining, if that's the right metaphor to use, for material outside of myself, meaning the material for my next book comes from the experiences I've had away from the desk. One of those experiences was going on a backpacking trip with a good friend of mine, and who is a novelist, the director of the Ashland MFA program, Christian Kiefer, who lives actually not too far from here in Auburn. Um, uh, and we took it was going to be a 3 day, I think it ended up being a 2 day long backpacking trip in a slot canyon uh, in the sand playas of Nevada, rural Nevada, 4 hours away, maybe 2 hours away from anything, really, really in the middle of nowhere. And we came across the carcass of an owl, a great horned owl. I think it was a great horned owl. I don't know my birds, but it was an owl for sure. It was an owl, and we tried to get a feather off of this owl until we realized this might be a bad omen. It might not be great to have stumbled across an owl on a 2 day trek into this slot canyon, where we were going to end our first leg of the trip at our water source, which was about 15 miles into the slot canyon. And the terrain was a lot more difficult than we had expected. There was a lot of brush, very difficult, dense to get through, a lot of thorny brush, and no water in sight. The creek that we had anticipated there from the map had dried up. And we were following this creek bed, and the earth was a little damp, a little muddy. So we knew there was something there still. We couldn't extract water from that mud, but we kept walking. And so this poem is about that time, meditating on our role in nature. And I had a panic attack, and once we got to our site, or I guess a good location that we found, because it was very windy that day. So we found a good location in a nook of one of the canyon walls. We set up tent for the night, and I had a panic attack that night in my tent, and I didn't bring anything with me to help me other than my journal. And it was absolute hell. I felt like trapped in my small tent, and it was blistering cold outside. But a cold that was dry, that was wind induced, and so it just chilled you to your bones. We ended up starting a fire to kind of keep ourselves warm, because I couldn't be inside my tent because of my panic attack, and I was just pacing back and forth. I couldn't really go out to walk off my panic attack because it was too dark. There was a lot of rocks around, and I didn't want to be walking at night where I couldn't really see. I had my headlamp, but I couldn't really see well. So it was an interesting trip, to say the least. And I ended up writing this poem because of it. And so I'm going to be reading this poem and talking a little bit about it afterwards. and it is I struggle to show the actual poem. I'm gonna start sending it out for publication, but it would be interesting to show a screenshot of my revisions and what this poem looks like on the page. Except I don't really know how to share my screen here on StreamYard rather than Zoom. So all you have to know is it's about this trip that I took. Had a panic attack. We saw an owl. It certainly was a bad omen, and kind of our engagement with nature. Particularly, I guess now we are at the mercy of nature with these atmospheric rivers. This storm that has really just flooded so many parts of California. Um, some flooding even here very close to home. That is has a lot of people on edge. So I guess it's always a reminder of the respect that we have to have for nature. So maybe the undercurrent of today's, I guess, stream is nature, our respect for nature, and that we are at its whims. Um, so this is titled "Poem Written in the Desert." I promise nothing. Our wandering grew away from us. We walked 10 miles, feet blistered, desert sage on the flat land, an endless populace of our burning. We left the beheaded owl we found on the trail after trying to rip off a feather. We knew it was wrong, but tried anyways. We came up with synonyms for the blossoming of a cactus flower, a ruin, a clouded annunciation, as in the ruins withstood our passing. I once thought I knew something about suffering, the precision of its angles gesturing towards fallow light, always a chromatic brightness where the hurt is good and gone. I thought I could say I had suffered, and that would mean something. The owl's head was missing, a more efficient animal than we. This is circular logic, I know. What is there to say of the cruelties I committed? There was salt on the ground. It was Nevada, the Nevada salt flats. Sagebrush so thick we crawled at times. These flats were once open water. The salt now slipped off us like wet clothes, like forgiveness without an exit, though I doubt we were forgiven. I am overdue. How quiet the hymns of kestrels flying above, their tender riots billowing like soft blown glass above us. At night, we wake and we wake again in the wreckage of camp, where we expected water but found none. Pacing back and forth like some kind of ancient accident, a mammal knowing it is the last of its kind. We feathered our exit, its ocean in distress. An omen, hardly agony. You could say it was a contradiction to expect something of the living, to disturb the owl, but not its aftermath. I realize now I am tending a garden. And if indeed a garden, let this one day on earth appear bright. And if I was given solitude, be allowed to move across it on a boat with no oar. I chewed on leaves that numbed my tongue to quell the panic. How I longed for a complex life that cost a lot of money, to be sad in an opulent hotel room with red curtains. It was too cold to wander away and walk my panic off in the pitch black. I scratched repetitive and simple shapes in my notebook and hands. I wanted to light the tent on fire, to write on its walls all the names I've been called. If you can't tell, this is a nature poem. I win by balancing necessity and control, such as it is to be absolved, the nature of my problem and the nature of the solution. I'm supposed to be working on accepting things I cannot control. It makes me feel so close to God. And yet, I'm not the fraud I think I am. Prayer through narrative labyrinths, prayer as the shortest distance between A and B. Either way, relationships are mostly transactional. Gardens are something you demand in return for your labor. My friend in the next tent talking to calm me down at 2 a.m. We built a fire with dried sage branches, but I would have gladly burned the owl and hid my hands inside. Either way, am I a coward with a different word for blossom, mimicking the senseless verbs of violence? I wandered at night with a flashlight through the dried arroyo, adorn my face, and I placed the feather where something, anything, would take it back. And so that was my poem. Um, yeah, I don't know what to say about it. I took something that wasn't mine. I wandered in the wilderness. There was a bad omen. And you'll notice, at the end, I couldn't go walking, but I said I did. And at the end, I couldn't give that feather back because I couldn't actually rip the feather off. Um, but this is kind of the situation that I put myself in, and the poem that arose from it. And very, very rarely does a poem come directly from one particular experience. In my life, in my poetry, it comes from notes that have been scattered over the years that I've collected, over the months, sometimes from just wanderings and ruminations in my journal. But this one, the event happened and I wrote about it. And so I guess it's important to remind myself of this, to remind myself that poems can come from such simple acts. Poems can come from washing the dishes and staring out the window. It can come from tucking your kids in at night. It's not that you need a compelling narrative in order to write compelling poems. You just need to look at everything that is familiar with a strange eye. And with that, I think I will leave us and just wanted to thank you again all for this opportunity for a very brief, very, I would say maybe not light-hearted, but certainly very breezy occasion to share some of my poems with you as the Yuba Sutter Poet Laureate. And wishing you all the best to stay safe with the storm coming. And thank you. I will see you all next month.